Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and welcome to our webinar on TCFD requirements across Asia. My name is Ruben Langbroek, and I'm head of Asia Pacific for GRESB. Today, we're here to discuss the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD in short, and the impact it's having on the real asset sector across Asia. And with this webinar, we aim to provide you with an overview of the TCFD recommendations, how they're being adopted by Asian regulators, and the challenges and opportunities it brings to the real asset sector. We will hear from a panel of GRESB experts who will share more information on TCFD in terms of what it means and why it's relevant to real asset managers and owners. We'll also take a deep dive into the regulatory landscape of climate-related disclosures, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from our speakers representing Singapore Stock Exchange, Hong Kong Exchange, and Bursa Malaysia. But last but not least, we'll have a closer look at the TCFD-aligned report and how this product can help you gain actual insights for engagement, compliance, and improvement. Some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, please submit them in a chat box somewhere here at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer them the best we can during the Q&A session at the end of the session. The webinar is also being recorded, and a copy will be shared with all attendees after the session. And if you experience any technical difficulties, please reach out to our support team through the chat box as well. And finally, of course, we encourage you to engage in our discussion and share your thoughts and insights with us. The TCFD enables investors to make better informed, responsible investment decisions, which is very core to the mission and vision of GRESB. We believe that disclosing climate-related risks and opportunities across the sector really helps investors as well as managers better understand both risks and opportunities and how they can impact their businesses. Its adoption across Asia is a very positive step towards a more sustainable world and real asset sector. And we hope that this webinar provides you with valuable insights as well as a better understanding of the TCFD framework itself. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to my colleague Karthik to provide an introduction to the TCFD. Karthik, take it away.
Thank you, Ruben. Once again, a warm welcome to all attendees and our featured speakers from SGX, Hong Kong X, and Bursa. I'm Karthik, Regional Sales Manager for Asian Infrastructure here at GRESB. So over this brief 10 minutes, I'll be taking you through what TCFD is, why it matters not just to Asia, but globally, and how TCFD recommendations guide climate-related disclosures and reporting. The FSB established the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures so that investors can benefit from an ecosystem of relevant, comparable, and homogeneous information on financial risks and opportunities due to climate change. And in 2017, the TCFD released its final recommendations, which provide a framework to develop more effective climate-related financial disclosures through existing reporting processes and increased transparency. The task force believes an impetus for fostering this ecosystem is the continuing growth in investor demand for companies to report information in line with these TCFD recommendations to support informed, efficient capital allocation decisions. And under these TCFD recommendations, 11 recommended disclosures are specified. In essence, these 11 recommended disclosures by the TCFD are underpinned by 4 core elements, which you see here in this Venn diagram: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. Now let's put this into perspective on its immediate need. Today, 12 countries, of which 50% are from APAC alone, over 1,700 companies, and over 750 financial firms have committed to making climate-related risk disclosures. This represents over 15 trillion in total market cap and over 160 trillion in assets under management from approximately 4,000 TCFD supporters globally. Because TCFD has been a driving force behind this ecosystem, real asset owners and operators see TCFD as an implementation tool for clients and beneficiaries, guiding more informed financial decisions due to 3 intrinsic characteristics. The first, real estates are immovable. They can't be easily transplanted. The second, real assets are long-lived. often outliving most other industries. Typical asset life is 30, even 50 years or so. And most importantly, the third, because real assets are long-lived, they remain more susceptible to non-linear climate challenges. So for real asset owners and operators, these three characteristics are more eminent in the core elements of strategy and risk management. For instance, over the short, medium, and long term, transition risks and physical risk can impact an organization's financial planning and overall business strategy. Now, what are transition and physical risks? A transition risk is basically a business-related risk that follows societal and economic shifts toward a low-carbon and more climate-friendly future. These are broadly in the form of policy and legal risks, such as carbon taxes, ETS, energy consumption taxes on real assets. The other being technology risks, such as increased need for efficient HVAC to comply with building codes and certifications, environmental impact assessment due to new floating solar PV technology, for instance. And the third being market and reputation risks, such as more informed tenant choice and source of energy, digitalization of new services that decentralize conventional operating models in, for example, waste management and diversion, power systems, etc. And on to physical risk. That is any risk that arises from the physical effects of climate change and environmental degradation. These are in the form of acute physical risks, such as typhoons, floods, earthquakes, and of course, chronic physical risks, such as heat waves and cold snaps causing rolling blackouts in electric grids, even rising sea levels causing loss of habitats, polluting drinking water supply, and increasing waste disposal needs. In the subsequent slides, I'll briefly cover an example of recommended disclosures in one of TCFD's recommendations. Now, what you see in the next slide is one of the recommendations by TCFD and what would be the recommended disclosure. Now, instead of going through these examples, which I've briefly covered in my previous discussion, let me talk about Aurizon. Now, Aurizon is Australia's largest freight rail operator. It's listed on the ASX. In disclosing under TCFD, Aurizon identified a transition risk to its reputation as a moderate to high risk in access to funding and licenses over the short, medium, and long terms. This is largely due to investor concern that climate-related risks may result in higher costs of capital for both the business and Aurizon's customers for funding coal mining, transport, and coal-fired power projects. Now, directly on the bottom line, Aurizon found refinancing of existing borrowing facilities or development of new mines, greenfield, rail infrastructure, and coal-fired power may incur higher borrowing costs. In addition, they further expected delays in approvals or restrictions on license conditions impacting their growth opportunities. Through TCFD disclosure, Aurizon found that to mitigate these risks, it had to continue advocating the importance of high-quality Australian thermal coal supply as contributing to comparatively lower greenhouse gas emissions relative to lower quality alternatives. Moreover, Aurizon found that it should further diversify its funding sources, extend tenure wherever possible, and broaden its access to a range of capital markets. And in large part of its other disclosed risks under TCFD, it found the need to establish a renewables working group to identify opportunities to participate in renewable energy programs and energy efficiency initiatives. Now, on to the next slide. You'd see that I'll provide a TCFD overview and adoption in APAC. And as per the latest 2022 TCFD status report, TCFD now has more than 4,000 supporters globally across all asset classes. Adoption in APAC is at 47%, mainly driven by Australia and Japan. In total terms, that's 11 percentage point increase in adoption year over year. In the status report, it also indicated that 90% of investors are incorporating climate-related financial disclosures as part of their decision-making process, with 66% indicating such disclosures are factored in the pricing of financial assets. With that, I'll now hand over to my colleague Pooja, who will introduce the current regulatory landscape in APAC.
Thank you, Karthik. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our distinguished guest speakers. I am Pooja, also based in Singapore, and I am the Member Relations Manager for the APAC region, overlooking all existing members across Asia and Oceania at GRESB. Today, I'm going to be providing a high-level overview of the climate-related required disclosures in the APAC region. The Financial Stability Board first established TCFD in 2015, and the task force released the final climate-related disclosure requirements in 2017 to help companies provide better information to support informed capital allocation. Since then, TCFD has published 5 annual status reports indicating the percentage of companies disclosing TCFD-aligned information has steadily increased since 2017 to now having approximately 4,000 supporters in 101 jurisdictions globally. Currently, as Karthik mentioned, there are about 12 countries across the globe who have now made announcements regarding climate-related disclosures in becoming mandatory. As we can see on this next slide, this is prevalent across 6 countries in the APAC region, namely Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Please kindly also note that the dates that are indicated on this slide refer to when the announcements were made, not necessarily when it's going to be implemented from. If we take a closer look into these regions, we can see in December 2020, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, short for HKMA, issued a draft guidance indicating that authorized institutions should make around aligned disclosures. A few months later, in April 2021, Australia and New Zealand both first introduced announcements regarding climate-related disclosures. For Australia, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority published a TCFD-aligned draft guidance on managing climate risk. In November 2021, they indicated that it considers it better practice for any disclosures to be produced in line with the framework established by the TCFD. New Zealand, on the other hand, introduced a legislation that would require mandatory TCFD-aligned disclosures for large financial market companies, including large publicly listed companies, insurers, banks, non-deposit takers, and investment managers. And this would be effective from the start of this year. Shortly after, in June 2021, the Tokyo Stock Exchange in Japan revised the corporate governance code, indicating that certain companies should enhance their disclosures based on the TCFD recommendations. With that, prime market companies were required to comply as of last year. As Karthik indicated, Japan has one of the largest number of TCFD supporting companies and organizations at just over 1,000 supporters, representing approximately 25% of the total number of TCFD supporters across the globe. In August 2021, the Singapore Exchange Regulation proposed a roadmap for mandatory TCFD-aligned disclosures. Issuers in the transportation, materials, and building industries are subject to mandatory reporting beginning January 1st, 2024. Most recently, in June 2022, last year, the Joint Committee on Climate Change released the TCFD guide for Malaysian financial institutions, outlining key recommendations for all local and foreign financial institutions, which are expected to adopt the basic recommendations set out in the application guide. This will also become mandatory in 2025. In the next section of the presentation, we will take a deeper look and hear directly from the regulators in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Malaysia, where climate-related reporting will become mandatory. Please allow me to introduce our honorable speakers we have for today's session. From the Singapore Exchange, we have Michael Tang, the Head of Listing Policy and Product Admission and the Head of Sustainable Development Office. From the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, we have Kelly Lee, Senior Vice President of Policy and Secretariat Services from the Listing Department. Last but not least, from Bursa Malaysia, we have Dr. Ken Yeo, who is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Governance and Sustainability. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Michael to provide us with more insights on climate-related regulatory landscape in Singapore. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Pooja, and a good day to everyone. I'm Michael Tang, looking after policy, products, and sustainability at Singapore Exchange Regulation. Singapore Exchange operates the stock market in Singapore, and Singapore Exchange Regulation is responsible for the regulatory development and supervision of our listed companies. Real estate is a particularly important sector for Singapore. We have over 40 property trusts and REITs listed in Singapore, having over 100 billion Singapore dollars in market capitalization. And this represents close to 12% of the Singapore's overall listed entities. I would first bring you on a journey of how Singapore Exchange introduced sustainability reporting as well as climate reporting against the TCFD recommendations. This really started in 2011 when we introduced a voluntary guide to our listed companies and announced our policy intention for all companies to start reporting on their sustainability risks and opportunities. In 2016, we upgraded the sustainability reporting requirement into a listing rule and made it mandatory for all companies to produce a sustainability report. Shortly after, the TCFD released its recommendations, calling on all entities to disclose their climate-related risks and opportunities. We also accompanied that recommendations with the publication of a regulators column, which is a forum for us to highlight emerging trends and opportunities to our listed companies on areas that they should pay attention to. Over the course of 2019 and 2020, we reviewed the sustainability reports of all listed companies in Singapore, as well as through the COVID era, published suggestions on what companies should disclose to the market in terms of the social risks that they face during the COVID pandemic. In 2021, we embarked on a public consultation, having looked at the reports that were produced by our companies on climate reporting. We found that half of our listed companies identified climate change as a material factor that they are grappling with, but only 1/3 of them actually reported on any greenhouse gas matrix that can be used to assess the potential risk to them. Still less, about 2% of the companies actually used a framework specifically targeted for climate reporting. And it is with those findings in mind that we embarked on a consultation of the market to make TCFD reporting mandatory for listed companies in Singapore. At the end of 2021, with majority support for those proposals, we introduced reporting against the TCFD recommendations in Singapore. Concurrently, we also rolled out a common set of a core ESG matrix that we've suggested that all companies should refer to in reporting on their material ESG risks and opportunities. Last year, we launched a digital reporting platform called ESGenome, which would better help companies report all this information into a common database from which investors are able to access and therefore better analyze the performance of their portfolio companies. We also embarked on a mandatory training for all directors on sustainability matters to bring all directors of Singapore companies up to speed on the latest trends and developments on sustainability. We also rolled out climate reporting workshops for all companies so that preparers of these reports would have a better understanding on how to produce this report. Last year, we also launched a new initiative called the Sustainable Fixed Income Initiative, which recognizes green, social, and sustainable bonds for listing on SGX. In terms of the reporting requirements on what a sustainability report should contain, it is primarily around 6 primary components. Firstly, a description of the material ESG factors that the company is facing, its policy, practices, and performance in relation to each of these identified ESG factor, the targets that the company has set for these ESG factors, the selection of a suitable reporting framework for reporting on these material ESG factors. GRI is one of the most popular frameworks used by Singapore companies. We also ask that the board puts up a statement certifying that it has overseen the management of ESG risks and opportunities within the company. And the enhancement work that we did in 2021 was also ask companies to talk about the management's role in supervising sustainability. I've mentioned that we've also introduced new reporting requirements for companies on climate disclosures aligned to the TCFD recommendation. Now, this sustainability report needs to be subject to internal review by the internal audit function within the company to better give assurance to the board as well as to public investors that the sustainability reporting process is a robust one, and therefore the data and information being reported are reliable. Additionally, we recommend that companies can consider the setup or the engagement of an independent external assurance provider in order to give better assurance to companies. Now, Pooja mentioned the roadmap that we have introduced in order to progressively allow all Singapore companies to report against the TCFD recommendations. So for this financial year, for last financial year, we've asked that all companies produce a TCFD reports on a comply or explain basis against the 11 TCFD recommended disclosures earlier presented. For this financial year, more carbon-intensive industries such as financial, agriculture, food and forest products, as well as energy, will need to do TCFD reporting on a mandatory basis. In the subsequent year, materials and buildings, as well as the transportation sector, would have to do this on a mandatory basis. So we expect to see the first reports aligned to the TCFD recommendations coming out through the course of this year. Now, I mentioned about the 27 core ESG matrix that we've recommended, and this is a overview of each of these items. You'll see that they cover all of environmental, social, and governance aspects, with environmental aspects covering greenhouse gas emissions, which is an important metric in the management of climate risk by all companies. That is an overview of our reporting requirements in Singapore, and I would now hand it over to Kelly from Hong Kong Exchange to talk about the Hong Kong experience.
Thank you, Michael. Good day, everyone. So I'm Kelly from HKEX, and my pleasure to can join all of you here today to talk about our HKEX ESG regulatory framework, as well as how we have aligned with the TCFD recommendations. First of all, some information about our ESG regulatory journey. We first introduced the concept of the ESG to our listed companies around 10 years ago. And since then, we have been adopting a progressive approach in terms of enhancing our ESG requirements in order to ensure that it remains to meet stakeholders' expectation, as well as reflect the international best practices. Since 2016, we required all listed companies in Hong Kong to produce an ESG report on an annual basis. And one important milestone that we have achieved is in 2020, when we incorporated the key TCFD elements into our ESG framework, which I will now go into more details later. So a high-level overview of our ESG regulatory on the reporting requirements. So basically, we have divided our requirements into two aspects, into two subject areas, namely the environmental subject area and the social subject area. And under these two subject areas, we have various aspects. For each aspect, issuers are required to disclose on the general policies, as well as some key performance indicators, KPIs. For example, under environmental, they will need to disclose both Scope 1 and Scope 2 GHG emissions, etc. So in terms of the TCFD alignment, as I said, the enhancements that we introduced in 2020 has already incorporated the key TCFD elements into our framework. On the governance pillars, we go further to make it mandatory for board oversight and governance of all ESG issues. And for all other pillars, for example, we require our companies to consider and also disclose the impact of significant climate change risks, as well as what steps or plans that they have taken or they plan to do in order to mitigate these climate-related risks. We also required issuers to set targets for certain environmental aspects. And last but not least, we also required other companies to review the progress of all the ESG-related targets. So, and other enhancements that we have introduced last year is that we have required all the ESG reports to be published at the same time as the annual report. This initiative is hoped to improve the timeliness of ESG information to allow all the investors and stakeholders to have a more comprehensive assessment and understanding of the company's financial and non-financial performance. And as the ESG rules are part of the listing rules, so if our companies fail to comply with our listing rules, depending on the seriousness, they may attract disciplinary sanctions. So where our issuers are. We regularly will review our issuers' performance in terms of their ESG reports. So last year we have conducted another review and look into our issuers' ESG practices, especially focusing on the requirements that we introduced in 2020. We are very happy to see that our issuers have made significant progress, and which proves that our rules are driving the positive behavioral change. For example, as I said, given our focus is on the ESG governance, we see that most of our companies have in place a robust ESG governance and oversight measures. And on the new climate-related requirements, although currently all these requirements are on a comply or explain basis, we see that over 85% of our listed companies chose to disclose all the new climate-related disclosures. We think that this is very encouraging and also reinforcing the direction and also their acknowledgement of the importance of climate change issues to their businesses. We also look at some voluntary disclosures made by our companies on climate-related matters. For example, whether Scope 3 GHG emissions or also the use of climate scenario analysis. Although all these are not currently is not required under our ESG rules, we find that a meaningful portion of our issuers also took a very brave or bold step in making all these voluntary disclosures. And is again very encouraging and also reinforce our direction of travel. So in this year, our focus will be how we can further enhance our climate-related disclosures. I think and very important international development is the establishment of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, and also its sustainability and climate standards. And so we are also looking and monitoring closely the development of ISSB standards, and with a view to how we can further integrate all these ISSB standards as they are also built on the TCFD recommendations into our ESG reporting framework. Obviously, regulation alone is not sufficient in order to drive or steer our company's sustainability journey. So we have also put in a lot of efforts and resources in terms of raising the market awareness on ESG or climate-related issues. And also we've tried to provide a lot of practical tips to our issuers to help them to understand our expectation and also to help them how they can do better ESG or climate reporting. For example, we have a one-stop platform, ESG Academy, where we house all our regulatory guidance there. We have different sorts of guidance, for example, webinars, seminars, e-trainings, or published guidance are all being hosted at this one-stop platform. And on TCFD specifically, we have TCFD trainings, which are available for download on our website. And we also have a published guide on climate disclosures, which provide a structured way in order to help our issuers to produce TCFD-aligned disclosures. So I would definitely urge all of you to have a look at our ESG Academy. So this is an overview of our HKEX ESG regulatory framework. And now I will pass the platform to Dr. Ken Yule from Bursa Malaysia.
Thank you, Kelly, and a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ken, and I lead the Corporate Governance and Sustainability Department here at Bursa Malaysia. Many thanks as well to GRESB for inviting us to share our insights. Now, in order to provide the necessary context, I will first outline Bursa Malaysia's current sustainability reporting requirements for all 900 plus of our PLCs. Now, at present, all Malaysian PLCs are required to produce a sustainability statement in their annual report. In it, PLCs are required to provide pertinent details on how they manage material or significant sustainability risk and opportunities. Of course, this is inclusive of the sustainability governance structure that they put in place, as well as how key sustainability themes, be it climate change, anti-corruption, human rights, employee health and safety, are identified, prioritized, and also managed. Now, our framework, in its design, accords a lot of flexibility for PLCs. They are expected to conduct their own materiality assessment to determine which sustainability themes are relevant and should be prioritized. They then adopt practices as well as disclosures that are best suited for their respective operating context. Now, while we are heartened to observe significant improvements in the overall depth and quality of disclosures since 2016 till now, a number of challenges have also emerged. For instance, with a flexible approach where PLCs adopt their own tailored methodologies, for example, the performance indicators that they adopt, investors often find it difficult to do like-for-like comparisons or benchmarking. Hence, we see a need to enhance the overall degree of standardization and comparability of disclosures. In addition, we've also observed that some of our PLCs are not really prioritizing certain sustainability matters that should be material across, like climate change. Hence, we need to fix the availability of certain key disclosures that must be improved. So in response, Bursa also, like our partner peer exchanges, have undertaken a comprehensive review of our reporting framework and to try to address the heightening informational needs of our PLC's key stakeholders. Hence, this resulted in the rollout of our enhanced sustainability reporting framework, which was officially launched back in September 2022. Now, for our main market PLCs, in our enhanced framework, Bursa is mandating the disclosure of a set of 11 common sustainability themes, as well as associated indicators that are deemed to be material to all PLCs regardless of size or sector. So for instance, examples include waste management, health and safety, emissions management, etc. Now, each common sustainability theme is tied to selected indicators to facilitate stakeholders' assessment on how effectively our PLCs are managing such issues. For emissions management, the underlying aim of requiring them to disclose Scope 1, Scope 2, and limited Scope 3 emissions is to nudge PLCs, our PLCs, to devote more attention to reducing their carbon emissions over time and to ultimately commit to achieving carbon neutrality or net zero. Now, above and beyond measurement and disclosure of emissions, all main market PLCs are required to provide more comprehensive climate change-related disclosures that are aligned with TCFD recommendations. Now, Michael earlier Of course, from SGX, he mentioned about all 11 recommendations under the 4 pillars. Well, we require the same of our PLCs. We would like to see in future years disclosures that hit all of these 11 recommendations, and this will be effective financial year end 31st December 2025, reporting early 2026. For our ACE market that are largely made up of smaller PLCs, our proposals are pretty similar to those of their main market counterparts to promote comparability, but with the exception of disclosures aligned to TCFD. For ACE market PLCs, they are only required to disclose a basic transition plan towards a low carbon economy. We see this as a more reasonable ask because, on the one hand, even though they need to urgently internalize climate-related risks and opportunities in improving their business resilience, at the same time, we have to recognize that they are relatively less mature in their reporting, as well as relatively less resources and internal capabilities as compared to their main market counterparts. So unlike other jurisdictions, we actually differentiate by market. Now, other key requirements that we have rolled out includes the need for 3 financial years worth of data for each reported indicator, as well as a performance data table containing a summary of all data provided throughout the sustainability statement at the end of the statement. And we also require a statement of assurance. So each PLC is supposed to state whether they have subjected any or all parts of their sustainability statement to an internal review or external assurance process. Now, of course, apart from listing requirements, similar again to our peer exchanges, we also offer ample support for our PLCs, from provision of comprehensive guidance and toolkits to organizing advocacy sessions to offering Bursa Sustain, a one-stop e-knowledge repository of the latest developments in the ESG space. With that, I conclude my presentation, and the next presenter is Eric. So over to you, Eric. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining today, and thank you to our speakers for the great insights that you've given. My name is Eric Landry. I'm the Director of Climate Change at GRESB, and I'm responsible for anything climate related. So that includes net zero alignment, transition risk and physical risk assessment, as well as carbon accounting methodologies. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the GRESB TCFD alignment report and what it can do to help issuers and GRESB members go ahead and test their alignment in line with the recommendations of the TCFD. So with that, we'll move on to what exactly is the GRESB TCFD alignment report. And I'll read it off the slide here, and we'll dig into the bits of this definition. It essentially helps GRESB participants tackle their TCFD challenges by using information from the GRESB assessments to assess and build their climate-related practices, processes, and disclosures in line with the TCFD recommendations. Now, this isn't trying to replace any of the other TCFD disclosure efforts that you might be doing in parallel. But it can certainly help as either a first step or a check on other efforts that you're doing. It can definitely jumpstart a lot of those processes. So, but one of the key components that I want to dig into a little more on the next slide is the fact that you don't need to do anything other than go ahead and report to GRESB through the regular GRESB assessments. So all the information that we use to populate this GRESB TCFD alignment report is drawn from the responses that you'd give in your general GRESB assessment. So this happens for all 3 assessments. So whether that's real estate, whether that's infrastructure fund, or whether that's infrastructure asset. For the infrastructure fund, again, we have for all three of these assessments, we have 2 components. We have the management component, we have the performance component. So if you're going to go ahead and get a TCFD alignment report on the infrastructure fund side, we actually draw up the performance information from linked assets into the TCFD alignment report for the infrastructure fund. Now, in terms of, what is in this report, what can you expect to see? The first thing is, well, just very high level, if you were going to put a rating on your level alignment on a scale from A to E, kind of where do you stand? How is that alignment in a single metric? And then we continue to break that down. So, okay, well, how does your alignment look in terms of the recommendations of TCFD at a core element level? So those are the 4 pillars that you can see kind of, again, reflected in all the ways that we're trying to increase alignment. So we can see for governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets, that's the core alignment level. And you can see we produce alignment levels for each of those. Again, we go into a deeper level where we go ahead and produce an alignment level for each recommended disclosure. So these are the 11 recommended disclosures that fall into these different 4 categories. And then last but not least, we wanted to give a little more insight into the balance of, okay, well, where do these climate-related risk processes focus? So we collect a lot of information in the GRESB assessments regarding transition risk exposure identification and impact assessment. And then also on the flip side, we also collect those things on identification and impact assessment on the physical risk side. Now, if you're looking at an overarching number, sometimes it can be hard to differentiate between, well, do we do some sort of processes for both transition risk or physical risk? Or did I have 100% in a really structured and well thought through and complete process for transition risk, but nothing on physical risk? And so that's what that balance is meant to show. It's like, okay, well, how are you doing on both sides of those climate related issues? This is a demonstration here you see on the slides of the TCFD alignment level per recommended disclosure. And so you can see, again, breaking down into each of those 11 recommended disclosures, not only the performance of the entity itself, but then also that of its benchmark. That's what GRESB does best, is benchmarking. So you can see against your peer group, how did the rest of your peer group do in terms of reporting in line or out of line with the TCFD regarding each of the 11 recommended disclosures. So on the next slide, you'll see we wanted to give something a little more. So not just kind of like a quantitative estimation of basically where we think you are in terms of alignment, but provide a little more hand-holding, a little more guidance in terms of, okay, well, how would I go ahead and use this information and draw it into my own TCFD reporting efforts? So for each of the recommended disclosures, so it's about 1 page each, 11 pages in all, in terms of a little more guidance. So on the left-hand side, we see the standard TCFD guidance language that you'll find in the final recommendations. And you can see for each recommended disclosure, there's a variety of different descriptions and components that you might consider when making a very detailed and complete TCFD aligned disclosure. But again, a lot of times this can be sector agnostic, it can be very high level. And so on the right side, what we've tried to do is to go ahead and provide a little more, well, how does that actually connect to the indicators and the outputs of the GRESB assessment? So where should I be looking in terms of what indicators actually make sense to go ahead and speak to each of these components on the left-hand side? Where would I find that in the GRESB assessments? And how should I maybe not be interpreting the answers and the configuration of the indicators in terms of, okay, well, what information can I grab and pull into my other TCFD efforts, or what information can I not, won't really stand to test if I want to go ahead and use that for mandatory and compliance purposes. Really quickly, here we have for both infrastructure and real estate, just some aggregated metrics and how those are all increasing across the board over time. In 2021 was the first year that we had these TCFD or the complete set of TCFD aligned metrics integrated into the 3 GRESB assessments. But you can see on year for the 2 years that we've had this out so far, for every single pillar, we can see the average alignment score in Asia going up over time. And this is really, really good to see, and is very much corroborating the story that Kelly was saying earlier about monitoring these issuers' performances and seeing them go up and their alignment go up and compliance go up over time is really encouraging. So if I'm going to leave you with just a few points to remember from everything about this TCFD alignment report and what it means and what it doesn't mean, you can really break it down into these 4 broad areas. First is, again, you don't have to fill anything else out other than just going along with the general GRESB process and completing your assessment. We take it from there. We draw that information out of the assessment and use it to compile this TCFD alignment report. The second thing is it's really well suited for a gap analysis. It's not going to tell you how detailed your scenario analysis is. It's not going to tell you like all of these, every single metric that is pertinent to your business specifically, but it's going to give you a good sense of, okay, well, am I missing anything big? And if I am, where should I begin to look for that? And how might I be able to align that with, increasing GRESB score over time? The third part is about benchmarking, and I should mention here that the benchmarking, this is what GRESB does. This is the core of our business, and so we do that benchmarking at the, again, overall TCFD alignment level. We do it at the core pillar level for those 4 core TCFD areas, and then we also provide peer group benchmarking at the 11 recommended disclosures level. So again, at each of those recommended disclosures, you can see the distribution of how your peers are scoring in terms of their alignment as well for your sector and region. And last but not least, you can use it as a tool for engagement. So even if you're very sophisticated and you already have a TCFD report and a bunch of consultants helping you compile those, it's a great way, at least for GRESB investors, to go and say, well, yeah, no, I know about the GRESB alignment methodology. I have a bunch of other alignment reports that I'm looking at, and so I can kind of see where everyone else is standing. And wow, I think, well, you can take a look at and how you compare to your peers before you engage. But that's just another mechanism to provide that kind of, apples to apples comparison, and put that in front of your investors to show them and demonstrate that you're increasing your alignment over time, and that you might be best in class for your peer group as well. And so with that, I will hand it back over to Ruben. Thank you very much.
That was very insightful. Obviously, in a Q&A session, we'll provide some questions to the speakers to help you get a bit more understanding in terms of what was discussed. And perhaps to start with the first question, obviously TCFD and reporting, it's not rocket science perhaps, but it's definitely not easy either. So we'll be interested to hear from the regulators. What do you think or foresee as being the key challenges in terms of implementing TCFD in financial reporting? And perhaps we can start with Michael from SGX.
Sure. Well, I think different companies, depending on their internal structures and the level of maturity that they're at, would face maybe difficulties with different aspects of the TCFD recommended disclosures. I think Eric presented an overview of TCFD alignment results. I think it appears that risk management seems to be on a lower scoring than the rest of the pillars of the TCFD recommendation. I think this reflects perhaps the difficulty in translating some of these physical or transition risks into financial impacts and then quantifying those impacts for reporting. I think other difficulties that we've heard include perhaps difficulty with scenario analysis in order to conduct a robust analysis of what are the potential impacts to the company, as well as then what is the transition plan where would the company bring its business forward in a low carbon economy. So I think these are some typical areas that I think companies would have perhaps to spend more time on.
Thanks, that's helpful. And another recurring item was indeed, I think all of you providing training to boards and other stakeholders within the companies that need to comply. Perhaps a question to Dr. Ken. Are there any other tools or services that you can provide to the financial markets to better align or better understand what is needed to comply with your regulations?
Thanks very much for that. I think one of the key questions and stumbling blocks that Malaysia as a jurisdiction is trying to address is the availability of data. I understand Michael has talked about, incorporating climate considerations into existing risk models is a problem, developing relevant climate scenarios and quantifying impacts is a problem, and for the firms to actually assess and also determine their scope 3 emissions is the biggest stumbling block at the moment. So via the Joint Committee on Climate Change that is co-chaired by our Central Bank and Securities Commission, and all of the financial institutions sit on, all the banks, insurers, and asset managers, we're trying to find ways to come up with perhaps a data platform and also guidance to SMEs to report their emissions data. Otherwise, it will all be proxy data, and it's very difficult for the modeling to take place. So we're trying to come up with an ecosystem solution to all of the stumbling blocks for better reporting.
Great, thank you very much. In the meantime, to all attendees, please keep those questions coming via the chat box below. Kelly, you mentioned alignment with the ISSB standards, another acronym and another standard, but this is quite an important one, as we know. So, yeah, of course, we are also looking at ISSB. What are your expectations regarding the upcoming, let's say, 2 elements, especially S2 of ISSB? And will that bring something entirely new to you as a regulator, or do you expect, let's say, more of the same in terms of aligning with the existing TCFD framework?
Well, how we see it is that earlier, like back in 2020, Hong Kong or all the financial regulators in Hong Kong already committed in terms of mandating all the relevant sectors to produce TCFD-aligned climate disclosures, so that by 2025. So that will be one of the target or objective that we have to meet. And with the upcoming ISSB standards, as I said, is based on and also built on the TCFD recommendations. So we will see it as an extension of the TCFD recommendations with more specific detailed requirements in terms of the climate or the other sustainability matters. So we will see it as a natural extension, but that's why we are looking at, how we can incorporate this ISSB standards into our existing ESG regulations. And I would say, I think in terms of the challenges that our companies will face, it will be quite similar in terms of what Michael and also Dr. Ken already mentioned in terms of the data availability, and also how companies can translate all these climate-related impacts into the financials and also the operations. I think this is also what the ISSB, when they have the consultation, also received similar feedback. I think it's quite global challenge for all the companies around the world. And I think similar to what Malaysia has been doing, in Hong Kong, we have the cross-agency steering group, which essentially is the financial regulators. And we are also looking in terms of how we can help our companies, no matter it's listed companies or other banks or insurance companies, asset managers, how we can provide more data for them in terms of their reporting, and also how they can analyze all these climate information. And I think another very important aspect is that how we can build in terms of capacity building is also very important, because we hear a lot of listed companies, especially they reflected the comment that even then when they engage external consultants, they do need in-house the knowledge how they can challenge or consider the advice given by the external consultants, which we think it needs this issue has to be tackled from all aspects, and I think it's how we can build up the whole ESG or climate change ecosystem together. I think it's really important.
Thank you. That's great to know. First of all, ISSB will not make things entirely different, which is good for those that are trying to wrap their head around TCFD. And secondly, indeed, the data challenge is a global one, and it isn't unique to APAC as a region. Some incoming questions, perhaps this one also related to ISSB. Eric, for you, obviously ISSB tries to converge different kind of existing standards. How do we foresee the GRESB standards align with ISSB, and especially the S2 framework that will be released later this year?
Yeah, thanks, Ruben. Very much in line with what Kelly was just saying. I think now I see kind of three main, let's say, flavors of TCFD globally. We have the ISSB, as we're talking about. We have the ESRS climate exposure draft coming out of Europe. And then we also have the US flavor with the SEC recommended or proposal. And I would say probably that the ISSB version follows most closely with the original recommendations of the TCFD, and this is probably for the simple reason that they created it just to do that. Whereas the European and the US frameworks were building on top of already like kind of differently structured for different purpose, and they're trying to build that into a pre-existing framework for whether it was kind of more financial reporting or something else. But for the ISSB standard, coming up with its climate-related proposal, they were able to follow the TCFD very closely, and so. And then also, given the fact that it is not kind of relegated to a specific region, they did have to take into consideration that they are going to have to make it a little more broad, a little more general, easy to adapt for different situations, so that can be applied in various markets. So I would say, by targeting the TCFD first, of course, it's additional. There's some more specificities, a little more granular, and so we can push towards that. But it will be maybe the first step after the original TCFD alignment.
That's great, thank you. Another incoming question, perhaps to all three regulators. How widely are financial implications in relation to climate-related risks already being disclosed in the region? And perhaps you can shine a bit more light to that specific part in your markets, starting with Kelly.
In terms of the financial impact from the climate-related risk, I think currently not a lot of our issuers will really disclose the quantitative information, so to speak.
Right.
I think it's the journey. It's more about having they take the steps in at least describing qualitatively or the direction how those climate-related risks will impact their operations, and also or in terms of how they would cater in all these risks and opportunities into their strategy and the direction going forward. Of course, if we you will see that in the ISSB standards, they do require the quantitative impacts to be disclosed, especially on the financials, and that's why we also encourage all our listed companies. They should start internally how they need to make sure that all the the relevant teams within the company have to be all on the same page to understand what's the impact will be on the ISFC standards or the TCFD standards, because it really requires the collaboration within all the departments. It's no longer only about the sustainability team or the CSR team, but it's all related to the HR team, the business team, and also relating to the accounting side of the company.
Great, thank you. Dr. Ken or Michael, would you like to briefly
I
address
completely
the question?
agree with Kelly. At this point in time, our overwhelming focus is to ask all of our listed issuers to internalize climate considerations. So if you look at why our effective date is financial year ending 31st December 2025, is it requires time to build that internal capability and capacity to take all this into account and translate it into impacts in terms of financial terms. So by and large, I would say we are not there yet as a market, but it is a journey that we will try to provide support, So that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, quite similar. I think feedback from Singapore as well. But I would say that this push towards a more quantitative analysis of the financial impact is a growing one. You can see it in the ISSB recommendations. You can also see it in what the SEC is asking of its reporting companies and disclosing the impacts to revenues or the expenditure spent to combat some of these climate exposures, as well as assumptions to these numbers. I think from the accounting and financial perspective, you also see from, I guess, the financial statements, more disclosures on these impacts as they affect the line items in the financial statements.
Excellent, thank you. Lots of incoming questions, and to attendees submitting these questions, if we can't address them right now, then we'll make sure to handle up or follow up on these after the webinar. Another interesting question, which is related to climate or perhaps intertwined, is that obviously today we've heard a lot about climate-related disclosures and opportunities and risks. What about nature and biodiversity and the upcoming task force on nature-related financial disclosures framework? You as regulators, are you looking into this? What's the, if anything, the time frame to incorporate into your regulations nature and biodiversity as material issues as well? Perhaps start with...
it's actually, let me go first, it's firmly on our radar, given the intricate interplay between climate and nature. But as a market, like I said, all of the financial institutions, all the PLCs are now trying to grapple with TCFD. So we are watching TNFD, the developments of it. Of course, it also depends on what the final form TNFD will take, Of course, then we will make our final assessment and subject whatever proposals, in the future to public consultation. But we would like to, at this juncture, focus more on getting TCFD on the way first, before we consider more actively, whether we would require TNFD-related disclosures.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's similar. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please, Kelly.
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation in Hong Kong. Obviously, the biodiversity, etc., is also closely related to climate, and we will put it on our agenda. But then we do need to do it in a step-by-step manner, because obviously our focus currently is more on the climate-related side. And then because to be honest, on the climate-related requirements, it already imposed quite a number of challenges to our listed companies already. And they do need to grasp the main gist of how to do this reporting before they can move on to the next or other topics. So we will closely monitor the development and see, as I said, that's why the whole purpose of evaluating our issuers' ESG reports or their practices, where they are, to understand their difficulties before we can really consider how we can further enhance or introduce more disclosure requirements on other topics.
Thank you.
And From my perspective as well, I think biodiversity is an important global issue. SGX is represented on the TNFD. And I think the important first step is in building this consensus of understanding and awareness of what are the types of potential risks and maybe profiles of companies that may potentially be impacted. But I think the beauty of having, say, an ISSB framework is that it allows for future topics, issues to be subsumed within the ISSA framework.
Yep.
So, for example, climate is something that's dealt with in the S2 standards that's been put out for consultation. I think the ISSB has said that biodiversity is something also important to them, potentially the next on the deck of work that they're looking at, so potentially an S3. And I think when we can build those consensus and the specificity on disclosures, that would be very useful for the entire global capital markets.
Right, thank you. So who knows, we might get to S45 later on. Thank you. Another interesting question. We've heard some potential, you mentioning some potential disciplinary actions for companies that might not comply with regulations. Can you give some examples, perhaps going back to Michael?
Yeah, sure. So I think like in Hong Kong, the requirement to produce a report is a listing rule requirement, and breaches of it will attract the entire suite of disciplinary action that we have. And we have on occasion issued a disciplinary action or taken disciplinary action for example, late disclosures of sustainability reports. I think maybe what the question may allude to is also this question of greenwashing and making maybe misleading representations. Obviously, there is this entire suite of securities regulation that deals with false and misleading statements. If the elements of those offences are made up, then these would of course also be actionable offences under existing regulation.
Thanks. Kelly, Dr. Ken?
Well, in Hong Kong, as I said, we regularly, when we review our issuers' ESG reports, if we find some non-compliance or any provisions that have not been disclosed, normally what we will do is first follow up with the relevant issuers. And in general, I must say, our issuers are quite compliant in terms of all the requirements. And well, it depends, of course, we will analyze what the reasons behind it may be some just oversight or etc. And normally they will remedy the or provide the subsequent information through announcement, etc. So of course we also need to take into account the information that has been disclosed. I mean, as Michael has said, I think for misleading information or greenwashing, that will be under the relevant legislation or other laws, but not within the listing rules. But I would say that going forward, we can definitely see whether there's assurance in terms of all the sustainability information. This is obviously an area that the ISSB side is also looking into, and I heard that that will be the assurance level. They will have some kind of consultation being published very soon. So I think this has to be, I think all the companies have to stay aware of that. And obviously, as we as the regulators, we will also monitor this development. And going forward, I would say that it will be more likely that all this information will also need assurance, and we have some independent check against and verification against the information being disclosed, which is a good thing to all the investors and also stakeholders.
Definitely. Dr. Ken, some final words?
Well, Malaysian PLCs are well known to be very compliant, so very similar to Kelly. But I think that the bigger concern is not really compliance per se, because remember, all our listing requirements at the moment requires 4 basic elements to be disclosed. So it is quite easy in that sense to comply per se. But the concern is much more the quality and depth of disclosures. as well as balanced. So of course, greenwashing can come in many forms and all that. Of course, when the PLCs start their journey towards sustainability, they would be more comfortable, shouting about their achievements and the more positive aspects. So what we've seen is that, reports should be more balanced, because the negative aspect should be highlighted as well, because it is a long journey. So quality and balance. And when it comes to socializing the concept of assurance, we feel that, especially for the smaller PLCs, that they're not considering at the moment subjecting their disclosures to an assurance process. So that's why we are now requiring them to at least every year have to declare whether they have subjected it to an assurance process. So this is meant to socialize the concept, and then we will tighten further in future years. So again, it is a progressive approach. We're not expecting miracles overnight, but we feel much more that this is the right approach, because we should be supportive of all efforts in this direction. Yeah, that's our perspective.
Thank you. And indeed, that sounds very sensible, right? We want the whole market to move into the right direction, but every now and then it takes taking some baby steps rather than very big steps. Thank you very much. Our time for the Q&A section, unfortunately, is over. But I would like to thank all speakers for sharing their insights and answering these questions. And again, some of the questions that are left unanswered, we'll follow up on those after the webinar. And of course, I would like to thank all of the attendees for joining today's webinar on the TCFD requirements across Asia. If you have any questions or feedback, obviously feel free to reach out to GRESB. And also, as mentioned, a copy of this recording will be shared with you shortly, alongside additional resources and materials that are mentioned during the webinar. And we also received a request to share the PowerPoint slides, which we will do. So that's all from us. We look forward to meeting you or seeing you at one of our future events, either be it online webinar or in-person event as well. So thank you once again. And from a very sunny Sydney, I would like to wish you all a very great day or evening. Thank you.